This is Talk Over Tea,
a place for a casual conversation about life in local government.
With Kassandra Gove
and Claudel Frederic,
elected officials from the city of Amesbury, Massachusetts.
Relax with us for a moment. The tea is hot.
We're back again.
We're back.
If this is your first time tuning in, thank you for tuning in. And if you're back, welcome back. So we are literally coming out of the budget season, and it was quite the experience for me. And I came out of budget season being really intrigued by revenue sources, and what revenue sources does for a community, how it shapes a community.
Yeah.
It was such an enlightening situation for us to kind of hear about that. And I would love for you to kind of elaborate on revenue sources for us and everybody else kind of tuning in. I think it's a great topic to chat about.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about revenues today. You can learn a lot from looking at a city's revenues, city or town's revenues. And it's interesting because in a budget season or budget sort of process with a council, you don't really talk that much about revenues, but it does really influence your community, right?
Yeah.
It shapes the community and how people live there, and what that experience is like. So there's some primary sources of revenue that we are most familiar with, right? Which is our taxes, our tax base, residential and commercial, which in a lot of official documents you'll see referred to as CIP, which is commercial, industrial, and personal property tax.
Got it.
Those personal property tax is usually like a pretty small piece of the puzzle or the pie. And then commercial, industrial, we kind of cram those together. So you've got residential and you've got commercial property taxes. And for most communities, they make up a significant portion of their budget, but not for all of them. And if you're looking at your community's budget, it's a good starting point to see sort of how much of the budget is on the shoulders of the taxpayers.
And how do you actually decipher that? Because you just told us about a few different types of revenue sources. Now, how do you decipher, okay, this is what's going to help, the taxpayers, like having this type of revenue versus another type of revenue?
Yeah. So taxes are a big portion of the budget in most instances. And then after that, you've got state revenue, or, sort of like state aid.
Yes.
So that comes in different forms. Then you also have local revenue, which is usually like fees, penalties, permits, different things like that. You could also have some other features of your community that bring in revenue. Some places have, parking revenue, things like that. So how does a community decide which revenue to sort of prioritize, or what that looks like? It's not really, I guess I wouldn't say it's a decision that you make, but more of a characteristic of your community. It might depend on where you live. It might depend on, so for instance, in Amesbury, we don't charge for parking. So if we made a decision like that, which for anybody listening, we're not making that decision, but that is a decision, an action that we could take, which would change that makeup of our revenue, right? If we said, hey, we want to lighten the burden however we can on taxpayers and on the residential taxes, we want to kind of reduce that bill, you can shift some of your services and shift some of your revenue into fees, permits, penalties, and other sort of like what goes into the local revenue source. Some communities will do that. I think we've talked before about trash. Some communities, and especially on the West Coast, you'll see more of their revenue comes from those permits and fees because they don't include them in their taxes. So for us, we sort of like pay our tax bill and we get everything. Your trash pickup is included, but you could take your trash pickup out of your tax bill and have people pay for that separately and pay a fee for trash pickup, which would reduce the portion of your pie for revenue that comes from taxes, and it would increase the piece of your pie that comes from fees. But you've just moved it over into that side of things, right? So those are decisions you could make that would sort of make that picture look different. But if you're in a place where you have there's some communities, and I've sort of looked at a couple locally that are really significantly different based on their geography, right? So if you lived in a place with a public beach and you had beach fees or permit fees for the beach, then you're going to have, naturally, you'll have more revenue out of your fees. If you have a public golf course,
yes,
you're going to have more revenue coming in from that source. That's just naturally going to be part of your budget. But we're not going to, if you're in a community that doesn't have those things, you're not going to build them in order to help move those revenues around. So some of it's just sort of part of your community makeup.
So restaurants definitely play like a huge role.
Yeah.
Restaurants, marketplaces, things like that. All those are like important revenues in certain communities.
Yeah.
Right.
Hotel, motel tax.
Okay. Yes.
Is one. So if there's a lot of communities that have no hotels, so they don't collect any hotel, motel taxes. Restaurants, some communities have no meals tax, local meals tax added. So you could make the decision to add a local meals tax. In a lot of ways, people think of that as sort of other people's money. You're not taxing your residents directly. Of course, we have a lot of residents who do dine in our local restaurants, which we love. So in some ways, yes, they do pay that. But so do other people who are visitors and guests. If you're in a community that is heavily based in tourism, then you're getting even more of that money from people who don't already pay taxes in your community and don't live there, but are visitors.
So basically, when you are speaking highly of your community and kind of engaging other people out of other communities to come into your community and spend their dollars, it definitely helps the community overall.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have fees like that in place.
Right.
And in some communities, their hotel motel tax, may include short-term rentals. So some people have a system in place for Airbnbs, or, we call them short-term rentals because Airbnb is it's like calling a Xerox, right? That was the company. And so, that goes into that too. Some people take that revenue and put it directly into, housing trusts and do work with affordable housing. But, when you have to look at that too. So when you look at that revenue stream and you can kind of see from a community, you can kind of see what's going on, right? So do we have a lot of hotels? Do we have, a lot of restaurants? Do we have a lot of short-term rentals? And that, when we say this sort of shapes a community, do you have beaches? Do you have golf courses? You get a sense of how that community looks and feels, what it would be like to live there. Again, is it really heavily tourism based? Is it really heavily commercially based? Is it really just a sort of bedroom residential community and everybody commutes and it's, it's like you're going to see a lot more people walking around, right? You're going to it feels like a place where more people live. You're gonna have small streets. You're gonna have wide sidewalks. Right? That's a different feel than something that's really, really commercially based, where there's malls and industrial parks, and you can kind of tell that by looking at the revenue when you look at, where's that weight,
right?
Where's the money coming from?
And that's something that I don't feel like many people do. Like, let's just say you're purchasing in a certain community. I don't know many people that actually say, you know what, let me go check out what the revenue sources are.
Right.
But maybe it is a practice that should be done.
Yeah.
Because it seems like you said, that is the makeup of the community.
Yeah.
Understanding that, you kind of understand what community you're getting into. So, yeah.
Yeah, we talk, and we each have a lens of real estate, having been real estate professional myself and you being one now, of, like, where do you want to live and what kind of a community do you want to be part of? Right. And how do you make that decision, right? People make their list of what they're looking for. And in a market like today, kind of, a lot of them are taking what they can get.
Right.
But as a best practice, sure, it would be really interesting for people to actually look at a community's budget.
Right.
To learn from it about what it would be like to live there. And I think I said on a prior episode, to think of it like you were buying a condo. So when people are buying condos, they have a list of questions, right?
Especially with the HOAs, yeah.
Right. What are the fees like? When was the last time there was an assessment? How many people live here? What's my percentage of the burden, right? Is it equally distributed by all 50 units, or is it based on my interest and my square footage? And if I have a bigger unit, I pay more of the fees. Like, people want records of all of the meetings and, what are the big capital expenses coming up? Yeah. But when you buy a house, you kind of like forget about that part. And that is, even if you're paying an HOA and you're a condo, you're still paying taxes. But if you think of it, when you're buying a house, those taxes that you're going to pay are into this broader community, and you
Right.
should know the same things, right? What are the big capital projects coming up? Because an assessment, thinking of it like a condo
That's
purchase,
exactly what it is.
that new school that's coming up that's going to be built in a few years, or that, police and public safety building that's, on the, in the queue, or, you want to know about those things. Or was it just built and it's already in the tax rate? Kind of looking at that budget, like what's been done, what's
Right.
coming up, and what would it be like to live there? And the budget does tell you a lot of that if you can kind of read the tea leaves, I guess, right? If you can kind of interpret those numbers, and they're public documents, they're all out there.
So let's kind of circle back to the percentage of revenues, right?
Okay.
So let's just say one community has, let's say 60% revenue coming in from, let's just say from the revenue, 60% is just revenue, right?
Well,
For the
all of your, right, you have your whole budget is,
Right.
you've got revenue that makes up your whole budget.
Correct.
And then the sources are,
So the sources are split.
sources are split
So if
between
you're
state
looking
aid,
at it,
taxes. Yep.
so are you looking at the split, comparing that split to another community? Is that basically what you should be doing? Basically saying, hey, it's split this way here, with commercial. Is it split the same way here? Is that exactly how it should be done?
Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
That's a really great way to learn about a community.
Right.
Right. So if you look at, I brought with me 2 charts.
Okay.
These are my data, right? So if I'm looking at this community here, I have 2 communities I'm going to put side by side. They're in Massachusetts, but I'm not going to tell you who they are.
All right.
So their managers and mayors don't call me.
Okay.
Ask questions. So this one over here has out of their entire budget, 55% of it is from taxes. So residential or commercial, industrial, and personal. So CIP and residential together, they pay about 55% of the budget.
Okay.
That's their part of the burden. Their state aid is only 1%. So they're getting very little state aid.
Right.
But their local receipts are 15% and their other revenue is 21%. They are the community that has 2 golf courses and a public beach.
Yeah.
So they're a tourism-based community,
Definitely.
and their other revenue and their local receipts are their parking, their the beach fees, the beach permits, like a resident pass to the beach, and the revenue from those golf courses. It's millions of dollars. Okay, so you can picture what it would be like to live there. Your neighbor's house might be an Airbnb. It might turn over all the time. It's going to be busier seasonally. There's going to be people there who don't live there, right? You're going to have like small shops. They might even close seasonally. So that like favorite coffee shop or that ice cream stand that you love,
Yeah, may
they're
not be there
they may not
all
be
year
open
round.
all year round, right? So like that's a certain way of life that you might really enjoy. You might want to be a docent at a museum. You might want to work at the visitor center. You might want to retire there. The tax burden is relatively low. It's only half the budget. And that's going to be kind of lively half the year, right? It's like going to be a cool place to live. So that's one example. This one over here is their tax burden, actually, interestingly enough, is also only 56%. And I'll compare those after. So this one, similarly, the tax burden, both residential and CIP, is 56% of the budget. Their state aid is 19% of their budget. So versus 1%, you get 19%. So they're getting a lot of state aid. This is actually a gateway community. So they get a lot of state funding. Their local receipts is 11%. They have enterprise funds that are 11%, and then they have a small amount of other revenue. So this is actually a really heavily populated commercial area. There's malls, there's healthcare centers, there are like a lot of highways, there's a lot of industrial parks, there's a lot of hotels. So a lot of people who stay here, they commute to Boston, they're here for conferences. There's a lot of industry happening in this community. And again, a gateway community. So they get a lot of state aid.
I do have a question about the state aid, right?
Yeah.
So what assumptions can you make from a community that's getting a lot of state aid? Are there any assumptions, like as far as when it comes to schooling, or is there anything that you could kind of assume when a community gets a good amount of state aid?
It's a great question. Gateway communities in particular get a lot of state aid. They have been designated as a gateway community in terms of providing opportunity to otherwise to communities that otherwise have not had those opportunities,
Got
right?
it.
So that's how they got that designation as gateway communities. So it's based on population demographics, and I'm sure lots of other things that I'm not that familiar with.
Got it.
So a gateway community is just going to naturally get a lot more money. It's our bigger cities, like Haverhill is a gateway.
Okay.
City Peabody is a gateway city. So you've got a handful of those. And otherwise, you'd have to look at their state aid to decide what it is they're getting for state aid, because state aid is made up of a lot of different things, lots of different formulas. It could be their school funding, it could be their veteran funding, it could be library funding, it could be all different things. But usually, it's based on their population and demographics.
Makes sense.
Yep. So then if you look at we'll go back to the percentage of their budget that is taxes. So for these two communities, it's actually very similar. It's about half the budget. But the one that is tourism based, if you look at that percentage of the budget, that 55%, 94.2% of that is residential taxes. Out of that half of the budget, when you want to split that into residential versus CIP.
Yeah.
94% of it is residential. So this is heavily residential.
Okay.
Their attractions are obviously the beach and the golf course.
Yep.
And then they've got some like little mom and pop places.
Got it.
At this community, you take that 56% and you look at the division between the residential and commercial. The residential is 70% and the CIP is 29. So it's 29.6 and 70.3. So you've got like a 70-30 split. So again, when you look at the two, you're going to say, wow, there's a lot more commercial business going on over here.
Right.
So this is going to be like I said, sort of easier to commute from. It's probably near a highway. There's probably a lot of jobs here. Different experience. And you can tell that just by looking at their numbers.
Got it. So now, obviously, this data is amazing, right?
Yeah.
Now, people are not looking at it maybe because they don't know where to find it. Like, how do you access this type of data as far as revenue sources? And maybe it's something you know right off the top of your head, or maybe it's something that we might have to tag on to this video. But I think it's going to be very important for people to at least know.
It's all public information. We're in Massachusetts, so I'm using Massachusetts data, and our state website for this is under the Division of Local Services, and they have a data bank. It almost has too much information in it at times. Like sometimes I can't find the chart I'm looking for. I know it's there, but I can't find it. And it's, again, just tons and tons of great information. So I pulled all of this information off of their website.
The DLS.
Off of DLS. Yep. And you can do community comparisons. So you can choose all the different communities you want. You could pull the ones sort of near you. You could pull communities that are like you, but they're spread out across the state. You can do all different things. And then you can also compare different years. So depending on the chart that you're in, you can choose different fiscal years. It provides you with a list, and you can export it to Excel. And then I made these charts.
Awesome.
So you do have to kind of know what you're looking for in some ways, which is why we're here, right? Is to help people figure out what they're looking for and how to better get involved in your community, how to understand what's happening and the decisions that are being made and why. But yeah, this is all out there. The other thing you can do is look for their budget book. Our budget book is something I'm very proud of, and it has all these charts in it, so you don't have to look very far for ours. And depending on the community, they likely have the same thing. So they'll have charts in there and explain the revenue. So the city council doesn't vote on revenues. We estimate our revenues, and then we use those to set our budget, and we have to present a balanced budget. So we start with the revenues, and then we come to you for expenses.
Yeah. But it's still, even during that process, we ended up talking about revenues a bit. And it led to this. And I feel like this is very important. Again, for everybody to understand how important the revenue sources are in a community.
Yeah.
And I'm happy you brought this data with you.
Yeah. The first time I've brought us visuals.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really fascinating. Obviously that's why I do this. I love it.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to be able to see, to see how communities differ. And I think one of the things that really points out to me is like how much you need to sort of zoom out. I say that a lot, like zoom out and look at the whole picture of a community before you can draw comparisons. Like you can't just say, well, they have this much free cash, so we should have this much free cash, or they have this much in their levy, so we should have this much in our levy, because you don't know all the other, you've got to look at all of the pieces of, their finances to really understand, where they're getting their money from and what their, reserves look like and, how they're making their decisions. So every community is so different. We're all in different positions. And what are those capital projects coming up? Maybe they have a lot in reserves because they're preparing for a big project.
Right.
Maybe they don't have a lot in reserves because they just embarked on a big capital project. So,
but to your point though, every community, depending on its location, they spend differently. 100%.
Yeah.
If I'm living really close to a beach, I'm probably spending a lot of time there and spending money at the beach, restaurants, you know what I mean? So it makes sense that you would look at these different resources or sources of money.
Yeah. So it's just, I think, important for people to kind of to take a step back and think about that. And, when you're in office, to be able to sort of filter that information and think about, sort of use it and then think about how it's applicable to the community that you're serving, and that, it's not one size fits all. You can't just copy and paste and make decisions specifically for your community, like, for the future and the betterment of the people who live there, work there, and who are, bringing businesses to your community.
Well, cheers to that.
Yeah. So you did a great job. Like you said, we just got through budget season, and it's hard. It's hard to make those decisions, and it's hard for people to understand why. Because, if you're watching, and again, this is why we're here, you kind of get just a snapshot. You're just, you're getting a 1 hour or 4 of the budget hearing.
Yeah, literally. It's just a snapshot. Yeah. That's it. Yeah,
it's just a snapshot. But yeah, revenues can tell you a lot, and they really dictate what you're able to spend. So those revenues matter. And yeah, sometimes there's some decisions that we're able to make to manipulate those. And we are always looking at our revenue to decide, can we find new revenues? And one of the things we did in our community in Amesbury just in the last couple of years is we looked at our fees, so what it costs for certain permits, what it costs when you're late to pay a bill, and we hadn't increased some of those fees like ever. So for 30 years, it was still just $5 if you were, for certain things. And so we really needed to sort of get ourselves back in line with the market. Communities around us had gone up, even for something like notary services. Everyone around us had gone up. And so everyone was coming to us for those services, which is great. But we were really busy. It was taking away from the services we normally need to do in a day.
Right.
So we were getting swamped, and we weren't charging enough.
Right.
So that falls under that other revenue source, and we really needed to adjust that. And so we do make those decisions to help us balance out and just keep those other revenue sources up, and do what we can to offset the tax burden and that big piece of the pie for us.
This is good. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like I said, very intrigued by revenue sources.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's something that I'm going to tap into even more now. So, and I hope everybody else does too.
Yeah. Awesome.
Definitely.
Very good. Anything else you've been thinking about since the budget process? Any big takeaways for you?
Oh yeah.
We've talked about the budget here for a couple of episodes, so this might be our last one, just for everybody's
so
sanity for a while.
The biggest takeaway during the whole budget season was basically, at one point it felt like it was the schools versus the municipality. And it was not the prettiest.
Yeah. It happens in a lot of on a regular basis in a lot of communities. It happens.
Right. And then as a city councilor, I think it was very important for me to understand my positioning in a situation like that. Obviously, I love kids and schools, but I'm also here to understand what's going on in the community. That community needs that same attention as well. And kind of looking at it where it's like, hey, the schools need all of this, so I have to give all this to the schools is not fair to people that may not have kids in schools and they're getting squeezed for certain things.
Yeah.
So kind of have to have a lens, a wider lens, and make decisions that are going to be, what I feel like is right.
Yeah.
So.
One of the things I always think about is how interconnected all of our departments are, including the schools.
Yeah.
Because if something happens, God forbid, at a school, they're going to dial 911. They're going to call on our public safety. So if we end up really cutting back in public safety, it is going to affect the schools too.
Yeah.
And we have SROs and school resource officers, and they are sort of ancillary duties, and so that that would be the first thing to go. And
right.
And we know how valuable they are. So there's this give and take that if I have to cut over at the police department, it's going to directly impact our schools.
Yeah.
And when kids aren't in school, they, in the summertime, they spend a lot of time at the library. Our library leads our summer reading program, and they do a lot of early literacy before kids enter school. We have a ton of programs at our library for young kids before they enroll in our public schools. So that affects our schools too, right? So there's just a lot of interconnected programming and impact on our families. And we have an aging population. We have seen a dramatic increase in the number of people in our community over the age of 65 in just the last 10 years. And so when you look at then at sort of the percentage of our population served by each of these departments, our Council on Aging is the teeny tiniest piece of our budget.
Right.
And they serve a growing number of people in our community who really need their support. So like you said, kind of step back and look at our community as a whole, just like with this revenue conversation, right? Like what does this really look like? How does this shape our community and the way people live here, and how do we provide services?
Right.
And
doing the most
it's
with
an
the
important
least.
It's tough. It puts us in a tough position, but it is really important. So I appreciate your good work doing that.
Definitely respect for a lot of the departments and the schools. Again, everybody is very thin as far as who they have available to do the work,
right.
So,
I think what's important is that, there's no one department more valuable than another, right? We need them all, and they all work together.
Absolutely. But that's where
well,
we're at.
that is the lesson out of budget season. So we appreciate everybody listening and living through it with us. Ask questions and get involved. So
absolutely,
we'll put that one in the rear view until we've got some more work to do. The tax rate gets set in the fall. We can talk about that then.
Yeah.
And otherwise, we're headed into the summer, which is everyone takes a little bit of a break. We take some time off from meetings and other things. So there we go. We made it. Yeah, very good.
Definitely happy.
Thanks.
All right.
That was great.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you. See you soon.